When it comes to The Sound of Music, Paramount made one of the biggest mistakes in film history. I guess they didn't have the vision of this guy. The Sound of Music turned 60 years old this month, so here are some things I bet you never knew about it. For starters, The Sound of Music is based on a true story. Maria von Trapp was a real person born in Vienna in 1905. After graduating from the State Teachers College for Progressive Education, at the age of 21, she entered Nonnberg Abbey, a monastery in Salzburg, with the intention of becoming a nun. While there, she was asked to teach the children of widowed naval commander Georg von Trapp. Captain von Trapp saw how much she cared about his children, and he asked her to marry him, even though he was 25 years older than her and they weren't in love. She went back to the monastery, and the mother abbess advised her to marry him, and so she went ahead with it, but as she wrote in her memoir, she wasn't thrilled at first. Quote, "I really and truly was not in love. I liked him, but didn't love him. However, I loved the children, so in a way, I really married the children." In the mid-30s, soprano Lottie Lehmann heard the von Trapp family singing and suggested they form at concerts. They took her up on the offer and became a popular touring musical act, the Von Trapp Family Singers. Germany invaded Austria in March 1938, and in September, the Von Trapp family fled to the US. Their abandoned home was later used as Heinrich Himmler's headquarters. The family continued to be a popular touring act in the United States, and in 1949, Maria published her memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers. Hollywood producers came calling immediately, but they only wanted the title, so Maria refused to sell them the rights because she wanted her entire story to be told. She then sold the European film rights to German producer Wolfgang Liebeniner, who released The Trapp Family in 1956. Then that same year, Paramount Pictures acquired the rights from Maria for a Hollywood treatment of her story. But get this, Paramount ended up dropping its option and not doing anything with it. And as we know what happens next, that was a pretty big mistake. In the late 1950s, Broadway producer Vincent Donehue proposed adapting the German movie as a stage musical for Mary Martin. Broadway producers Richard Halliday and Leland Hayward then acquired the rights, and they hired Pulitzer-winning playwrights Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss to write the script for this musical. The initial idea was that the stage musical would use mostly Austrian folk songs. So Halliday and Hayward asked Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein to write one new song for the play. Rodgers and Hammerstein didn't think their style would mesh with Austrian folk music, so instead they offered to write a completely new score for the musical, if the producers were willing to wait for them to finish Flower Drum Song. The producers said, "Of course, we'll wait as long as you want." The Sound of Music would then open on Broadway November 16th, 1959, winning 6 Tonys, including Best Musical, and running for 1,443 performances. And then Hollywood was like, maybe we missed something here. And in June 1960, 20th Century Fox bought the film rights to the stage musical for $1.25 million, which is equal to more than $13 million today. Fox then hired Ernest Lehman to write the screenplay. Lehman had written The King and I Movie, North by Northwest, and West Side Story. The stage musical and subsequent movie condensed, fictionalized, and heightened a lot of what happened in Maria's real life. It also created amalgam characters for the children and invented some characters completely, like Rolf and Max were not real people. When Ernest Lehman was turning the musical into a movie, he cut some songs and rearranged their order. Do Re Mi is a confined number on stage, but in the movie he made it a grand montage. And then Fox went looking for a director and considered Robert Wise, who made West Side Story. But he was busy preparing the Sand Pebbles, so they considered the stage version's director, Vincent Donehue, as well as Gene Kelly. But in January 1963, Lehman invited Ben-Hur director William Wyler to see the musical on Broadway. Wyler hated it, but Lehman wouldn't take no for an answer, and so Wyler reluctantly agreed to direct and produce the Sound of Music film. Wyler and Lehman then went on a scouting trip to Austria, but the writer could feel Wyler's hesitation about the project, and so he secretly sent the script to Robert Wise, who was now facing delays on the Sand Pebbles. By September 1963, William Wyler dropped out of The Sound of Music, and Robert Wise, who was impressed with the script, came on board to direct. Though Wise did tone down some of the sweetness and sentimentality in Lehman's script. Wise also disliked the opening aerial sequence because it was similar to how he opened West Side Story, but he couldn't think of a better opening, so it stayed. They then got Richard Rodgers to write An Ordinary Couple and I Have Confidence, specifically for the movie. Sadly, Oscar Hammerstein never got to see the Sound of Music film because he passed away in 1960. The script was finally locked on March 20th, 1964, and then came time to cast the film. Lehman and Wise's first choice for Maria was Julie Andrews, but they also considered Grace Kelly and Shirley Jones. Wise and Lehman got to see footage of Mary Poppins before it was released, and the director said at the time, "Let's go sign this girl before somebody else sees the film and grabs her." Andrews was hesitant at first because of the treacliness of the theatrical version, but when the writer and director shared their vision and that they were going to make it more serious, she signed on. Julie Andrews signed a 2-picture deal with Fox for $225,000, which is equal to more than $2.3 million today. Captain Von Trapp was a little bit harder to cast. They considered Bing Crosby, Yul Brynner, Sean Connery, and Richard Burton. Christopher Plummer was a well-known theater actor at the time, and Wise really wanted him for the part, but he rejected the offer several times. It wasn't until Wise flew to London to meet the actor and explain their version that Plummer finally agreed. But it was contingent on him getting to rework the character in the script. Plummer's input made Von Trapp stronger, more forceful, and more complex, with a wry sense of humor. They conducted hundreds of interviews and auditions auditions for the children in the US and the UK. Kids like Mia Farrow, Patty Duke, Leslie Ann Warren, Terry Garr, Kurt Russell, and the Osmonds all auditioned but didn't get cast. Charmin Carr, who played Liesl in the film, was a model who worked part-time in a doctor's office. She had no acting ambitions at the time, but after Wise saw a photo of her, they brought her in and she got the part. She only did one TV pilot and guest appearance after The Sound of Music and quit acting in 1966. The real Maria von Trapp has a brief uncredited cameo as a passerby alongside her daughter and step-granddaughter during I Have Confidence. Song and dance rehearsals began in February 1964. Max Bro and Dee Dee Wood, who choreographed Mary Poppins, did The Sound of Music as well, including the Lonely Goat Herd puppet choreography, while the Landler choreography was accurate Austrian folk dance. Sketch artist Maurice Zuberano created extensive storyboards for the film, illustrating every scene, and then Wise and art director Boris Levin used those as a guide when building the sets and directing the film. Fox gave The Sound of Music a budget of $8.2 million, which is about $84 million today, and filming began on March 26, 1964, on the Fox lot in Los Angeles, where they filmed Maria's bedroom, plus the abbey, cloister, and graveyard scenes. Wise shot the film on 70mm to make it as epic and cinematic as possible. In April, the production then flew to Salzburg, Austria, where they shot the wedding scenes at Mondsee Abbey. They also shot at Felsenreitschule Theater, Mirabell Palace Gardens, Residence Fountain, and on the streets of Salzburg. Plus, they shot at Nonnberg Abbey, the very place where the real Maria von Trapp had studied to be a nun. They then shot at St. Margarethen Chapel, Dürr Studios, Schloss Leopoldskron, and Fronberg Palace. The Do-Re-Mi picnic scene was filmed above the town of Werfen in the Salzach River Valley, and the opening scene was filmed at Melweg Mountain in Bavaria. The little brook that Maria walks through isn't actually there. It was a plastic set piece filled with water. And you know the scene where the boat flips over? Gretel actor Kim Carruth apparently couldn't swim and swallowed so much water that she threw up on Heather Menzies, the actor who played Louisa. Julie Andrews also learned to play guitar specifically for the movie. They finished filming on location in Austria by July and headed back to the Fox lot in LA to do interiors. The last two things that they shot were the gazebo scenes for Something Good and 16 Going on 17. In total, they filmed 83 scenes over the course of 5 months, and then principal photography wrapped on September 1st, 1964. During post-production, Christopher Plummer's singing voice was dubbed by veteran Disney playback singer Bill Lee. Test audiences in Minneapolis and Tulsa got to see a rough cut of the movie in January 1965, and their responses were sensational. But even still, Wise made a few more edits to the movie after that. The Sound of Music premiered on March 2nd, 1965 at the Rivoli Theater in New York City, and then Fox sent it out on a roadshow theatrical release where it played in select cities that could accommodate a 70mm print and 6-track stereophonic sound. The roadshow featured 2 screenings a day with assigned seating and an intermission like a Broadway show. It was difficult to find a total theater count, but it doesn't look like it played in more than 150 theaters total during its initial run. But it became a massive box office hit, and it stayed in theaters for 4 years. It held the #1 position for 30 of its first 43 weeks in theaters, and it was still in the top 10 in its 100th week of release. People went to see it again and again and again. In some US cities, the number of tickets sold exceeded the total population. It was also hugely popular outside the US, breaking box office records in 29 countries. By December 1970, it had made $121.5 million total worldwide, which is about $1 billion today, and it was the first film to gross more than $100 million total. It also broke Gone with the Wind's 24-year box office record. According to the numbers, after all of its re-releases, its gross is $286 million total, and it's estimated that The Sound of Music has sold about 283 million movie tickets total over time. And according to Guinness, when you adjust for inflation, it's the 6th highest grossing movie ever with a $2.984 billion gross. The soundtrack, as a result, became massively successful as well, hitting #1 on the Billboard charts. It stayed in the Billboard Top 10 for 109 weeks and in the Top 200 for 238 weeks. The album sold more than 20 million copies total worldwide, and in 2015, Billboard named it the 2nd greatest album of all time. But critics were mixed on The Sound of Music when it first came out. Some hated it, and some loved it. Legendary reviewer Pauline Kael called it the sugar-coated lie people seem to want to eat, while Philip K. Schauer of the Los Angeles Times described the film as 3 hours of visual and vocal brilliance. Today, 83% of the 77 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive. You know who else hated the movie? Austrians. It only ran for 3 days in Salzburg back in the 1960s, with locals rejecting the movie, saying it wasn't authentic. The Sound of Music would get nominated for 10 Oscars in 1966, including Julie Andrews for Best Actress, and it won 5 total: Best Scoring, Best Film Editing, Best Sound, Best Director, and Best Picture. AFI put it at number 55 on its 100 Years, 100 Movies list. It put it at number 4 on the Top 100 Musicals musicals, and 3 songs, The Sound of Music, My Favorite Things, and Do Re Mi, made its list of the top 100 movie songs. And in 2022, Variety put it at 87 on its list of the 100 greatest movies of all time. ABC paid $15 million to show the movie one time on TV, February 29th, 1976. That's equal to $88 million today. A year later, NBC paid $21.5 million to show the film annually over the next 20 years. But that recurring NBC broadcast was heavily edited not only to fit the letterbox ratio of TV, but to fit a 3-hour time slot. 30 minutes of the film were removed. Sound of Music tours remain immensely popular for Americans visiting Austria. By 2007, The Sound of Music was drawing 300,000 visitors a year to Salzburg, and more than 50,000 tourists a year take the local Sound of Music bus tour. Today, you can watch the movie on Disney Plus and Hulu, and as part of its 60th anniversary in 2025, Disney is planning a theatrical re-release and a new 4K Ultra HD remaster on Blu-ray that will reportedly bring the film as close as possible to its original look and sound. The real Maria von Trapp lived out the rest of her days in Vermont, managing the Von Trapp family lodge, which is still in operation. She died in 1987 of heart failure at the age of 82, and she's buried in a family cemetery on property.